Hello, everyone. Today we step into the shadows and spectacle of the medieval world, a time when infamy was a currency more valuable than gold, and the mere scorn of a king could transform a commoner into a national hero or a dismembered public spectacle. Tonight, we begin our deep dive into the remarkable stories of the most wanted people in medieval history. These were not merely common criminals. They were seismic disruptors whose very existence was an affront to the divine right of kings and the rigid, God-ordained structure of the feudal system. Their names were whispered in taverns, a mix of fear and admiration, and carved onto royal decrees. The true most wanted individuals did not just break the law. They threatened the entire medieval worldview, transforming a monarch's personal vendetta into a public hunt designed to restore cosmic order. Our journey starts not with a king or a grand schemer, but with a man whose life was violently ripped from its intended path. William Wallace, the man, the myth, the massive, unrelenting headache of King Edward I, often called the Hammer of the Scots. Wallace was destined for the quiet monotony of minor gentry life, but he chose to adopt a persona of pure defiance, going full most wanted mode by sticking it, loudly, violently, and without apology, to the invading English crown. His primary crime, in Edward's eyes, was simply existing loudly and proudly as a Scot under the oppressive thumb of a foreign, tyrannical king. The moment of transformation, when a man's life pivots from obscurity to legend, was one of profound personal tragedy. The flashpoint came when English troops, representing the heavy hand of occupation, killed his family, and according to Scottish legends, murdered his young wife, Marion Braidfield. Wallace's immediate response was not diplomacy or retreat. It was to embark on a systematic, blood-soaked campaign of vengeance, a literal murder tour of English garrisons. This sudden, spectacular defiance transformed him instantly from a local nuisance into a national rallying cry, quickly earning him the affection of a people starved for a symbol of resistance. Wallace's campaign quickly escalated into a full-scale national revolt, culminating in a monumental clash known as the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. This engagement was a brutal masterclass in exploiting geography and leveraging the tactical arrogance of a superior force. Picture thousands of English soldiers, heavy cavalry, professional archers, arriving at the River Forth, confronted by a ridiculously narrow, rickety wooden bridge, barely wide enough for two horsemen abreast. The English commanders, blinded by their disdain for the undisciplined Scottish rabble, failed to grasp the catastrophic danger of the bottleneck they were about to create. Wallace and his co-commander, Andrew Moray, watched from the high ground, their men armed with long spears forming defensive formations known as schiltrons. They executed a deliberate, agonizing delay. They allowed the English vanguard, the core of the attack, to stream halfway across the narrow bridge, fatally dividing their forces and creating a perfect logistical choke point. Then the Scots charged. What ensued was a coordinated, efficient massacre. The Scottish forces descended upon the trapped English, cutting them down like a harvesting scythe. The bridge became a lethal killing floor, a trap sprung by English hubris. Many English soldiers, weighed down by the heavy armor meant to protect them, panicked and drowned in the cold currents of the river below. The English left that field with a gaping, humiliating wound to their military pride. The victory at Stirling Bridge restored Scottish confidence, and Wallace was formally knighted and declared Guardian of Scotland, cementing his position as the most wanted man in Edward's realm. Naturally, King Edward I, who viewed the entire Scottish nation as a personal inconvenience, was absolutely furious. For him, Wallace was an existential threat to his political project, the complete absorption of Scotland. Edward pursued Wallace with the relentless fury for which he earned his grim moniker. This chase culminated at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298. Here, the professional discipline of the English military and the devastating, overwhelming power of their longbows proved too much for the schiltrons. Wallace's army was defeated, and he resigned his guardianship, becoming a true outlaw once more, a man stripped of official title, but now elevated to mythic status with the highest price on his head. For 7 years following Falkirk, Wallace lived a life of constant peril, a political phantom operating in the shadows. He continued his outlaw existence, raiding English outposts, frustrating royal authorities, and making the entire English occupation look like a catastrophic failure of security. But the fate of almost every successful medieval rebel is sealed not by the enemy's sword, but by the poison of betrayal. Wallace's long-anticipated expiration date arrived in 1305, when he was finally captured near Glasgow by the forces of John de Menteith, a Scottish knight who had sworn fealty to Edward I. He was immediately hauled off to London for a trial that was nothing more than political theater. The charge was high treason, the ultimate crime against the sovereign. Wallace's defense was powerful and defiant. "I cannot betray a king to whom I never swore loyalty." The English judges, however, were not interested. The verdict was a foregone conclusion: guilty. His execution was a calculated display of state terror, designed to be seen, felt, and remembered by every subject in the realm. Wallace was condemned to the full, gruesome horror of being hanged, drawn, and quartered, a punishment reserved exclusively for those deemed traitors to the crown. The process was agonizing and public. First, he was dragged through the cobbled streets behind a horse to the execution site. He was then hanged until he was only moments from death. Next, he was cut down, and his abdomen was sliced open, his entrails and vital organs flamboyantly removed and burned before his eyes while he was still conscious. Finally, he was decapitated. His body was then hacked into 4 separate quarters, and those pieces were distributed across England, sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Aberdeen, serving as morbid motivational posters for anyone contemplating rebellion. His head was spiked onto a pole at the southern entrance of London Bridge, gazing down at commuters like the most aggressive, rotten welcome sign imaginable. To Scotland, Wallace was instantly cemented as a martyr and a foundational national hero. To England, he was the necessary cautionary tale. His fate proved that in the Middle Ages, you could go from minor knight to national icon to dismembered street decor in record time. Let us turn now from the battlefield hero to a figure whose infamy was built on piracy and a brazen contempt for royal authority: William de Mariscoco. Forget the romanticized, charitable bandit. William de Mariscoco was the far more realistic, ruthless upgrade nobody asked for. A high-status rogue who robbed the rich and then, with absolute financial logic, kept every last shilling of the loot. William's origins are key. Born into a noble family in the early 13th century, his lineage was already tainted by long-standing accusations of treason against the crown. Instead of attempting to rehabilitate his family name, William deliberately chose to amplify the infamy. Why confine himself to the obligations of a regular noble when he could be a pirate, a political fugitive, and the most strategically irritating island landlord in the entire English realm? The incident that secured his place on the most wanted list forever was his alleged involvement in an attempt to assassinate King Henry III around 1238. The Crown's response was absolute. They didn't just want him arrested. They wanted him turned into a cautionary bedtime story. William's response was to escape to his family's stronghold on Lundy Island, a rugged, windswept rock off the Devon coast. This remote, naturally defensible location became his perfect personal villain lair, a medieval Batcave funded entirely by stolen silver. From Lundy, he launched a calculated and relentless career in piracy. He wasn't simply a thief. He was an economic terrorist waging war on the Crown's ability to conduct trade. He systematically raided merchant ships, plundered valuable cargoes, and seized coastal villages, turning the economically vital Bristol Channel into his own ruthless, private toll booth. William de Mariscoco's audacity was his staying power. For nearly 2 decades, a staggering period of sustained, open defiance, he maintained his pirate kingdom. This was not a quick raid. It was a permanent, grinding nuisance that made King Henry III look profoundly weak and utterly incapable of securing his own coastline. The king's failure to capture him for such an extended period spoke volumes about the weaknesses in royal administration, further fueling William's infamy. Merchants complained bitterly about the crushing losses, the crown fumed at the ridicule, and William simply continued to profit, treating the sea as his personal, unregulated ATM. The sheer expense and shame finally forced King Henry III to act decisively. He meticulously planned and sent a small, focused military force to storm Lundy Island. Inevitably, William lost the final confrontation. It was a stark lesson in medieval power dynamics. A ragtag crew of pirates cannot ultimately withstand the state resources of a furious, determined monarch. His execution in 1242 was the full expression of the state's need for public retribution. Like Wallace, he was first dragged through the streets of London, a deliberate public humiliation. He was then condemned to the complete hanged, drawn, and quartered fate. This full-spectrum punishment was meted out not just for the piracy, but for the profound political crime of attempted regicide and decades of mockery directed at the king's sovereignty. His body parts were subsequently distributed across the kingdom, serving as essential visual propaganda. The message was etched in blood and displayed on gibbets. Don't rebel, don't engage in piracy, and most critically, don't try to stab the king. William de Mariscoco was living proof that being among the most wanted in the Middle Ages was often less about morality and more about how spectacularly and sustainedly you managed to irritate the sovereign. If one were compiling a list of people that medieval kings desperately wished would simply stay quietly at home, Eleanor of Aquitaine would reside at the undisputed apex. She wasn't merely smart. She was dangerously smart, possessing an independent political vision that shattered the confining boundaries of the 12th century. In that era, such ambition in a woman was the quickest route to being labeled a witch or the ex-wife nobody could ever forget. Eleanor's primary crime was not violence, but inconvenient, disruptive ambition fused with astronomical political power. Born around 1122, Eleanor inherited the vast, sprawling, and culturally sophisticated Duchy of Aquitaine, one of the wealthiest and most influential regions in all of France. Her inheritance was literally continent-shifting. She commanded more land, more wealth, and more military resources than many noblemen combined. And this raw power was precisely what they resented and feared. Her first marriage, to King Louis VII of France, was a spectacular mismatch. Louis was pious and ascetic, yearning for a submissive queen. Eleanor was fiery, secular, and deeply eager to actually run things. The tension between them reached a fever pitch during the disastrous Second Crusade. Eleanor insisted on accompanying Louis, not as passive baggage, but as a political organizer, challenging both military and gender traditions. While Louis struggled with strategy, Eleanor was seen making practical, authoritative decisions, inevitably making him look incompetent. The marriage disintegrated not over infidelity, but over irreconcilable differences in political philosophy. Louis demanded obedience. Eleanor demanded partnership. Though the final grounds for annulment were the technicality of consanguinity, the true reason was that the queen was intellectually and politically superior to the king, and his ego could not endure it. The pivotal moment that secured Eleanor's eternal place on the international wanted list occurred within months of her 1152 annulment. She made a calculated, audacious move that sent shockwaves across the continent. She quickly married Henry Plantagenet, soon to be King Henry II of England. The marriage instantly forged the Angevin Empire, a colossal, unprecedented swathe of territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland all the way down to the Pyrenees Mountains. In one single, breathtaking move, Eleanor had transferred her massive hereditary holdings from the control of the French crown to the English, permanently reshaping the geopolitical map and making herself an eternal, unforgivable enemy of the French establishment. Her defiance had become an irreversible international crisis. With Henry II, Eleanor was at the epicenter of a new, explosive dynasty. She bore him 8 children, including Richard the Lionheart and King John. Yet, Her role went far beyond mother and consort. She actively managed governments, advised on high politics, and maintained her own sophisticated court in Poitiers, a renowned cultural center that effectively operated as a powerful rival to Henry's English court. However, Henry II, dynamic as he was, expected total obedience, not an equal partner. As he grew older and more reliant on absolute power, he began to encroach on her ancestral rights in Aquitaine. Eleanor, being Eleanor, did not quietly submit. She chose rebellion. By 1173, she openly supported her sons in the Great Revolt against their father, an international conflict that pitted the king against his own immediate family. Henry II ultimately crushed the Great Revolt, and his revenge against Eleanor was cold, calculated, and politically absolute. He imprisoned her for 16 long years, not in a foul dungeon, but in a series of comfortable, albeit severely restricted, castles across England. This extended incarceration was the crown's only viable method of neutralizing her colossal power. Her intellect and independent ambition were, in Henry's eyes, tantamount to high treason in a wife. For Henry, the punishment was less about retribution and more about necessary, sustained political isolation. Yet, even behind those gilded bars, Eleanor's political power persisted. Her very existence, a living martyr of royal tyranny, served as a potent rallying cry for discontented nobles. Her imprisonment lasted until Henry's death in 1189. She was immediately freed when her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, took the throne, and she wasted no time reclaiming her influence. At 67, an astonishing age for the era, she immediately stepped into the role of regent and governing monarch, managing the kingdom like a long-neglected project. She famously governed England while Richard was away on the Third Crusade, and brilliantly organized and negotiated his ransom when he was captured. When Richard died, she engineered the difficult succession of her youngest, most troublesome son, John. By the time she died at the age of 82, she had achieved the unimaginable, outlived two powerful husbands, watched two of her sons become the King of England, and established a dynasty that would indelibly shape the political and cultural destiny of Europe for centuries. Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't just wanted. She was the most powerful, intellectual reminder that sheer intelligence, relentless ambition, and profound political skill, especially when possessed by a woman, constituted a lethal combination that the medieval power structure simply could not control or contain. The story of our next figure is a dramatic testament to the fact that in the most desperate moments of history, the most unlikely person can be thrust onto the world stage and onto the top of the most wanted list. Imagine meeting Joan of Arc, a 15th century French farm girl who claimed direct counsel from saints, then proceeded to lead armies into battle with the tactical authority of a seasoned marshal. Born in 1412, Joan was utterly lacking in military training or aristocratic connection. But she arrived at the nearly shattered royal court of the Dauphin, Charles, insisting with absolute conviction that God had personally chosen her to save France from the devastating 100 Years' War against England. The context is essential. France was bleeding, demoralized, and on the brink of complete, irreversible defeat. The established political and military elite had failed spectacularly. In their utter, bottomless despair, the royal court ultimately decided, "We have nothing left to lose. Let's see what the teenage prophet can do." Remarkably, it worked. Dressed in a specially commissioned suit of armor, Joan became an instant, powerful symbol, part mascot, part miracle worker. Her absolute, infectious conviction in her divine mission psychologically rearmed the French soldiers. These men, previously defeated, suddenly found a unified focus and a belief that God was now unequivocally fighting on their side, a change that was as powerful as any tactical advantage. The true moment of Joan of Arc's military and psychological impact came during the Siege of Orleans in 1429. The city was the last major French stronghold, and its fall would have spelled the end of the Dauphin's cause. Joan arrived, and her presence immediately electrified the disheartened defenders, while simultaneously sowing terror and confusion among the superstitious English troops. Over several intense days, she didn't just stand on the sidelines. She led a series of aggressive, seemingly reckless sallies and assaults. Her sheer audacity broke the will of the besiegers. Within days, the English were forced to abandon the siege, a victory so unexpected it was deemed nothing short of a miracle. The humiliation was total. The English had been beaten by a girl who couldn't legally drink their weak medieval ale. Joan followed this triumph by achieving her primary political goal, convincing the hesitant Dauphin to undertake the perilous journey deep into enemy territory to be formally consecrated and crowned King Charles VII at Reims Cathedral. This act legitimized his reign and cemented Joan's status as a living legend. But Joan's success made her a profound liability. Kings do not enjoy being perpetually upstaged by a peasant prophet, and established church authorities absolutely abhor teenage visionaries who claim direct communication with the divine, bypassing their entire hierarchy. Worse still, Joan had become the undeniable national symbol of French resistance, which in the merciless world of medieval politics meant she was a giant, walking target. Her brief, brilliant career ended tragically quickly. Captured in 1430 by the Burgundian allies of the English while defending the town of Compiègne, she was not treated as a prisoner of war. Instead, the English, desperate to nullify the miracle of Charles VII's coronation, bought her for the enormous sum of 10,000 livres tournois and handed her over to a pro-English ecclesiastical court in Rouen. Their goal was simple: to destroy her credibility by proving her not a messenger of God, but a witch and a heretic. The trial was a devastating circus of political manipulation, disguised as a theological inquiry. The English ensured the court was populated exclusively by clergymen loyal to their cause, notably the ambitious Bishop Pierre Cauchon. The charge was heresy, a more destructive charge than treason. The English characterized her as a witch, a fraud, and a scandalous cross-dresser, because, tellingly, the act of wearing men's armor was deemed more fundamentally offensive to the clerical establishment than the act of leading an army to victory. The entire court proceeding was fundamentally rigged. Joan faced relentless streams of loaded questions, legalistic trick traps, and theological sophistry designed to force her to contradict established dogma. Though illiterate, she famously debated some of the most learned theologians for months. When asked the quintessential trick question, whether she knew she was in God's grace, she delivered a perfect reply that trapped her questioners. If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. The verdict was, predictably, guilty of heresy. The sentence, because medieval punishments were never subtle, was death by fire. On May 30th, 1431, at the tender age of 19, Joan was brutally burned alive in Rouen's marketplace. Crowds gathered, not primarily out of pity, but to watch the spectacle. Public executions were the ultimate form of medieval reality television. Yet, her martyrdom spectacularly backfired. The English believed they had extinguished the symbol of French resistance, but they only forged her into an indestructible legend. Decades later, with the French cause victorious, the Church conducted a retrial, a nullification trial. In an epic medieval oops, they cleared her of all heresy charges in 1456, declaring the original trial corrupt and politically motivated. Then, nearly 500 years after frying her at the stake, the Church canonized her as a saint. Nothing says, "we made a mistake," quite like elevating someone from condemned witch to holy icon. Joan of Arc wasn't just wanted. She was the ultimate nightmare of every medieval power structure. Young, female, stubborn, divinely inspired, and inconveniently successful. Her ultimate, unforgivable crime was achieving success outside the rigid, confining boundaries defined by men and hierarchy. If medieval rulers were striving for maximum political impact through fear, then Vlad III of Wallachia had the most aggressive and successful marketing campaign in the entire continent. He earned and embraced the chilling moniker, Vlad the Impaler. Subtlety, clearly, was a concept he never wasted time on. Born in 1431 in Transylvania, Vlad inherited a deeply unstable throne, a volcanic temper, and a profound, pragmatic knack for extreme problem-solving in the face of insurmountable external threat. Vlad's entire political persona was forged in the terrifying crucible of Ottoman expansion. He spent years of his youth as a political hostage at the Ottoman court, which taught him two critical lessons: the absolute power of the Sultan and the necessity of cultivating absolute, psychological terror as the only effective defense mechanism for a small state caught between giants. When he finally claimed the Wallachian throne, he faced a relentless dual threat: the constant military danger of Ottoman invasion, and the even more insidious internal threat of the treacherous local boyars, nobles, who perpetually conspired to undermine and depose him. His infamous nickname derived from his signature, calculated hobby, impaling people on wooden stakes. This method was not a standard form of execution. It was a deliberate, meticulous form of statecraft through spectacle. Vlad didn't merely execute criminals or enemies. He elevated executions into ghastly, nightmarish public art installations. The stakes were often meticulously blunted and greased, intentionally designed not to kill quickly, but to inflict a long, agonizing death that sometimes lasted for days. Imagine walking into a medieval town and finding yourself confronted by a literal forest of the impaled. Thousands of corpses arranged in neat, terrifying patterns, swaying in the wind like some grotesque, permanent Christmas display. The goal was not traditional justice. It was psychological paralysis and absolute, comprehensive fear directed at both foreign invaders and domestic dissenters. His relationship with the all-powerful Ottoman Empire was tense. On one famous occasion, he invited Ottoman envoys to his court. Noticing they refused to remove their turbans, citing a religious custom, Vlad, interpreting this as a profound sign of disrespect to his royal authority, ordered the envoys immediately seized and had their turbans literally nailed directly to their skulls. Problem solved, but his most decisive, career-defining stunt occurred during the major Ottoman invasion of 1462, led by Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed marched into Wallachia expecting a conventional military engagement. Instead, near the Wallachian capital of Targovist, he found something infinitely more terrifying: an estimated 20,000 impaled bodies lining the roads for miles, rotting in the sun, forming a silent, ghastly welcome sign. The message was unmistakable: welcome to Wallachia. Population, you, if you're not careful. The Ottomans were so profoundly horrified and psychologically defeated by this display of state-sponsored depravity that they turned around and retreated. Terrorism, in Vlad's hands, proved to be a brutally effective form of national defense. Naturally, cultivating a brand as the guy who uses trees to stab people did not win him friends at home. Local boyars loathed him. Rival claimants wanted him gone. Even his temporary Hungarian allies treated him with deep suspicion. Accounts differ wildly on his end. He was killed in battle around 1476, or possibly betrayed and assassinated by his own men. What is certain is that he did not retire peacefully. His head was severed and sent to the Sultan as a grim trophy, proving that even the impaler could ultimately be impaled by the brutal machinations of politics and betrayal. Centuries later, Bram Stoker borrowed Vlad's name and reputation for his fictional monster, Count Dracula. Vlad's brand stuck literally forever. He was not just wanted. He was the medieval equivalent of a viral horror meme, a ruler remembered eternally for his state collection of human stakes. Every medieval most wanted list demands at least one figure who could not possibly commit to a single career path. Enter Eustace the Monk, a man whose resume was a bizarre, bewildering list of titles: former Benedictine monk, part-time sorcerer, full-time pirate, international mercenary, and occasional accountant. Born around 1170, Eustace abandoned the cloistered life, supposedly after a family feud, and allegedly took up the study of black magic. Was he truly a sorcerer, Or was this just the medieval rumor mill slander against a man whose clever tricks and cunning seemed supernatural? After ditching the robes, Eustace quickly decided it was more profitable to break the law than uphold it. His conflict with the powerful Count of Boulogne escalated rapidly into full-blown outlawry. With the king's men closing in, Eustace ran to the sea and declared himself a pirate. This was not the idealized, charming rogue. Eustace was a brutal, pragmatic sea wolf, the type who would burn your ships, steal your entire cargo, and laugh while doing it. Operating primarily from the strategic safe havens of the Channel Islands, he established a terrifying presence that severely disrupted the vital trade routes between England and the continent. Crucially, Eustace was a true mercenary, driven by profit, not patriotism. He fought for France when it suited him, for England when the pay was better, and most often, purely for himself. He was, in essence, the medieval gig economy in human form, constantly switching employers based on immediate financial or strategic advantage. By the early 13th century, Eustace's reputation had become so monstrously effective that both King John of England and King Philip II of France desperately wanted him either working exclusively for them or permanently dead. He became a crucial, unpredictable player in the relentless Anglo-French conflicts, raiding coastal ports, seizing minor fortresses, and charging protection fees like a medieval mob boss who held jurisdiction over the waves. His chaotic, profitable career ended with brutal finality in 1217 at the Battle of Sandwich. Eustace was commanding a French fleet when it was cornered by the highly determined English navy. The English employed a surprisingly clever, early naval tactic, blinding the French fleet by throwing powdered lime, or caustic dust, from upwind. Disoriented and losing cohesion, Eustace's flagship was quickly overwhelmed by the English boarding parties. Offered the standard chance to surrender for mercy, Eustace defiantly declined, a bold final gesture. Instead of a long, costly trial or a formal delay, the English, intensely tired of his decades of treachery and chaos, took the most direct route. They swiftly dragged him to the mast, and one English commander personally chopped off his head with a single stroke. The quick decapitation was followed by a collective sigh of relief that reputedly echoed across every port in the English Channel. Eustace the monk was not remembered as noble or tragic. He was remembered as the living, breathing chaos button that every major power had regretted pressing. Most generals struggled to achieve victory with the full use of their senses. Jan Žižka of Bohemia seemed to operate with a superior clarity in spite of his devastating physical handicaps. He lost one eye early in life fighting, then lost the other later on in a siege, rendering him completely blind, yet he remains one of the most brilliant and undefeated military commanders in history. Blindness 0, Žižka 100. Born around 1360, Žižka came of age in a deeply turbulent Bohemia. When the Hussite Wars erupted following the judicial murder of the reformer Jan Hus in 1415, Žižka, a seasoned mercenary captain, immediately threw his formidable military experience behind the Hussite rebels. The Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church believed they were simply fighting disorganized peasants. Žižka proved them disastrously wrong. He transformed those farmers and peasants into a highly disciplined, religiously motivated army that systematically chewed up waves of crusaders sent by popes and emperors alike. His genuine military genius lay in his revolutionary adaptation of a common farming tool, the war wagon, Wagenburg. He didn't just invent a tactic. He essentially invented the medieval mobile fortress, the precursor to the tank. These heavy, fortified wagons were chained together into mobile ramparts, bristling with pikes, crossbows, and early firearms known as hand cannons. Žižka's Wagenburg tactics turned every muddy field into a calculated, lethal, and impassable death trap for heavy cavalry. The most astonishing part of Jan Žižka's story is that he continued to command and to win, even after he went completely blind in 1421. He directed complex, large-scale battles using a combination of trained messengers, precise memory, sound, and a near supernatural instinct. His soldiers followed him not just because he was tactically brilliant, but because losing simply was not on the menu, ever. Under Ziska's command, the Hussites won repeated, consecutive victories against massive crusades launched by the combined might of European Christendom. This was a sustained, profound humiliation of the feudal military elite. His reputation grew so fearsome, so absolute, that his enemies sometimes literally refused to fight him outright, convinced that to face the blind general was to face certain, divinely ordained defeat. He finally met his end in 1424, not by an enemy blade, but tragically, anticlimactically from the plague. According to a dramatic but persistent legend, Ziska ordered that his skin be flayed after death and made into a war drum, so that even after his passing, he could continue to terrify his enemies upon the battlefield. Jan Ziska was not just wanted, he was utterly unavoidable. He was the blind general who beat everyone, remained militarily undefeated, and fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. If Scotland had the passionate martyr William Wallace, Wales possessed Owain Glyndŵr, the man who essentially looked at the full might of English authority and replied with a firm, enduring, not today, Henry. Born around 1359, Glyndŵr came from a family of minor Welsh nobility, but his blood ran with enough fierce, ancient national pride to make him absolutely, fundamentally inconvenient for the English crown. In 1400, fed up with decades of heavy-handed English rule, Glyndŵr took the audacious, seismic step of declaring himself Prince of Wales. This was not merely a local protest, it was a full, royal claim to sovereignty. Within weeks, he transformed from a respected local landowner into the most wanted man in all of Britain, with an enormous price placed upon his head. What followed was the Glyndŵr Rising, a rebellion that the English crown failed spectacularly to crush for over 15 years. Glyndŵr proved to be a master of guerrilla warfare. He rallied farmers, nobles, and anyone else who resented paying English taxes. His forces fought a campaign of brilliant mobility, ambushing English troops, torching English-held castles, and then famously vanishing into the deep, rugged Welsh hills and forests like a medieval phantom. His rebellion was so successful that his supporters drafted serious political documents, planning for an independent Welsh church and a national parliament. For a glorious, defiant moment in the early 15th century, it genuinely looked as though Wales might break free. The English response to Owain Glyndŵr's success was one of increasing, frantic brutality. King Henry IV threw armies at him. Later, King Henry V threw even bigger armies. Yet, every single time the English crown believed they had Glyndŵr cornered, they found only an empty hill and a fading campfire. His ability to evade capture became so legendary, it bordered on the supernatural. Welsh villagers swore he was protected by ancient magic. But all rebellions eventually require sustained funds and relentless morale, and both began to run dry for the Welsh cause. By 1415, Glyndŵr's main forces were scattered, his castles were lost, and his family had been captured. Yet, the man himself did the most spectacular thing possible. He simply disappeared. There was no dramatic last stand, no capture, no execution, and no heroic martyrdom. One day, he was leading the resistance. The next, he was merely a whisper, a ghost, a promise. He vanished so utterly and completely that his precise fate remains one of the great, enduring historical mysteries. The English crown, profoundly humiliated by their failure, continued to officially list him as a fugitive for years after he was almost certainly dead. Nothing is quite so embarrassing for a powerful empire as being perpetually haunted by a rebel who may not even exist anymore. Owain Glyndŵr remains an enduring national hero in Wales. The ghostly prince who defied the English vanished in a legend and left behind a story that history itself could not kill. For the English, he remains the most wanted man that permanently got away. Our list now transitions to figures whose infamy stemmed less from political rebellion and more from profound moral or intellectual danger. First, Elizabeth Bathory, the name synonymous with aristocratic horror. Born in 1560 into the highest Hungarian nobility, Bathory possessed massive castles, staggering wealth, and more power than most men could handle. By the early 1600s, rumors began to spread that she was allegedly murdering young servant girls, with the most lurid tales claiming she bathed in their blood to maintain her skin's youthfulness. It is crucial to note that the lines between truth and political smear are profoundly blurred. Bathory was a rich, powerful widow, and many ambitious men wanted her land. Accusing an inconvenient woman of mass murder was a proven method to seize her assets. In 1610, investigators arrived and claimed to have found evidence of torture. Due to her noble status, she avoided public trial and execution. Instead, she was permanently walled up in a chamber of her own castle, where she died in 1614, still entombed. Her legacy remains a chilling mix of true horror and political cautionary tale. Next, Gilles de Rais, the catastrophic fall of a national hero. Born in 1405, Gilles went from being a celebrated military commander and comrade in arms of Joan of Arc, France's golden boy, to one of the most infamous true crime subjects in history. After Joan's death, Gilles retired and seemingly spiraled into madness, squandering his fortune on alchemy experiments. The dark rumors began, accusations of kidnapping, torture, and the ritual murder of potentially hundreds of children. The accusations at his 1440 trial were unspeakable, though historians debate if the charges were inflated to seize his immense wealth. The evidence was deemed overwhelming. He was arrested, tried, confessed, and was sentenced to be hanged and then burned. His spectacular, rapid fall from hero to monster cemented him as the ultimate medieval boogeyman. Finally, Marguerite Porete, the heretic of the written word. If authorities hated anything more than armed rebellion, it was a woman with radical, powerful opinions committed to parchment. Marguerite, a French mystic of the late 13th century, wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls, arguing that the simple soul could achieve divine union and thus move beyond the rules and need of the church. This idea was an existential threat to the entire medieval religious hierarchy. Her book was declared heretical, and she was ordered to stop distributing it. Marguerite refused. Arrested and tried in Paris in 1308, she defiantly refused to recant. The predictable verdict was guilty of heresy, and on June 1st, 1310, she was burned at the stake. The profound irony: her book survived the censorship and later circulated widely, eventually recognized as a masterpiece of Christian mysticism. Marguerite Porete was wanted not for violence, but because she wrote something too radical, too defiant, and far too inconvenient to be ignored. Her crime was intellectual independence.